All right, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our OVS VAP Training Center webinar, Evaluating Performance. I'm Blake Cush, the Director of Training and Outreach at OVS. Many regions in New York State have officially started the transition forward on the way to reopening and a return to in-office and in-person work. And we understand that this time of transition comes with some excitement, challenges, and some questions. So we're here to help you. Today's webinar is actually our last in the Transition Forward webinar series, which was originally developed with the goal of helping you tackle some of these unique challenges. Each webinar, including today's, is recorded, and the links are made available on the OVS VAP Training Center webpage, which is ovs.ny.gov/training. These recordings can also be accessed on our OVS Training YouTube channel. I'm actually happy to share that our Transition Forward webinar series had more than 1,200 attendees from over 200 different organizations participate. So a very special thank you to all of you who have joined us in the past and who have returned again today. We hope these have been helpful to you, and we encourage you to share with your colleagues and check out all of the recordings online. So finally, as soon as you exit today's webinar, you'll be directed to an evaluation survey on the presentation. Please take a couple minutes and give us feedback. You'll also have an opportunity to notify us if you're interested in receiving training or more follow-up on this and a variety of topics. You will, when you exit the webinar or WebEx, it gives you a warning pop-up saying you're being redirected to a research.net website, and it is safe, it's trusted, it's a SurveyMonkey evaluation. But please take a couple minutes for us. That feedback is super crucial to us, and it helps us actually improve our next series or whatever other training topics we want to cover, and your feedback is invaluable, so thank you. Finally, today's webinar will be led by Jenny Amstutz of JA Strategies and Alan Krieger of Krieger Solutions. Jenny and Alan have more than 40 years of combined experience in consulting and training, working with nonprofits and agencies around the state of New York. Both have also served as executive directors of nonprofit organizations, and both have master's degrees in management. So without further ado, I'd like to formally welcome Jenny and Alan.
Thank you, Blake. Um, uh, Today we'll be talking about evaluating performance. And I know Blake talked about the webinars that we've done so far. And today during the webinar, we're going to be referring to some topics like setting expectations, motivation, and coaching that were part of these previous webinars. So the list that we have on this slide here is a list of the previous webinars that will help with some of the concepts that we're going to talk about today. So if you missed them and would like to review them, they're available on the Training Center website, as Blake mentioned, along with all of the other webinars that have been done since April. And so you can visit that link here for more information. This next slide is just a really quick review for those of you who haven't been one of our webinars before. We use the chat feature to take questions and ask for your feedback. And if you haven't used this feature before on WebEx, you can find it at the bottom of the screen, just really by clicking anywhere on the WebEx screen. The menu pops up, and in the center of the icons is one with a bubble. And that bubble is the one that opens the chat box. It's a black icon if you haven't opened your chat box yet, and it's blue once you have. The chat box will open on the right of your screen. Be sure your chat box is set up to send your messages to all panelists. So take a moment to change that setting right now. And we'll take turns monitoring your questions. So by sending it to all panelists, you can make sure that we're going to see the question quickly. We'll try to answer the questions as we go along, but we will take time at the end to answer any of the questions that we missed. During the webinar, we're also going to be giving you an opportunity to participate in a couple of polls. So when we open the poll, a box will pop up on the same right-hand part of your screen, and you'll be able to click the answers. After the poll is done, you can click on the X in the upper right-hand corner to close the poll results so you can see the chat box and everything again. Now we're going to talk a little bit about our performance, the goals of today's webinar. Performance evaluation and performance appraisals might be a regular part of how you supervise right now in your job, but I also know that for a lot of places, though performance evaluation and performance appraisals are often put on the back burner, put off, and in some organizations we rarely complete them. So today we're really going to talk about the value of performance evaluation and why you want to start making it more of a priority. We're going to cover what the performance management cycle looks like, including how to develop the plan and what some of the key steps are. And while we're going to talk about what we think some of the best practices are, we do realize that some of you may already have existing systems in place. And those systems may include some of the things that we're talking about, and they may not include others. So we're going to give you some hints on how you can include some of the strategies we're suggesting, even if they aren't part of your existing appraisal system. We know that there are barriers to making your performance evaluation system effective, and so we will cover ways that you can overcome those. And finally, we believe that performance evaluation is not a once-a-year thing, but it's a year-round activity. So we're going to talk about what that looks like and what you can do to make to support effective performance evaluation all year round. So we're going to start, as I said, with a quick poll, and we want to get a sense of how you feel about your current system of performance evaluation or performance appraisal. How effective do you think it is? Is it very effective, somewhat effective, or not very effective? Or do you not really regularly do performance evaluations? We know that may be the case. How open, honest, and meaningful is your performance system? Is it always open and honest, or is it rarely? Finally, if you're a supervisor, how skilled do you think you are at conducting performance evaluations? Have you done a lot of them so you consider yourself very skilled, or are you new at it and feel that you're somewhat unskilled? And if you've never conducted a performance evaluation, tell us that too. We're going to give you a minute to think about your responses and then answer. So decide quickly. The clock counts down pretty quickly. And remember, this is an anonymous poll, so you can be honest in your responses. So Rachel is going to open the poll right now. It's open. Perfect. Just on the wrong screen for me. I will move it on. It looks like the second question didn't upload, so that's fine. Just answer the two, the first one and the third one. All right, you have 5 seconds, so answer quickly. All right, terrific. So it'll take us a couple seconds to publish the poll so everybody can see the results. All right. Great. So almost, it looks like about 100 of us answered the survey out of 160. So that's great. I looked about 10 of you, so less than 10%, maybe about 5% of you thought that your performance evaluation system was very effective. The majority of you thought yours was somewhat effective. 21 of you thought that it was not very effective at all. Only 15 of you said you really don't regularly do performance evaluation. So that's terrific. And then when you thought about how skilled you were, most of you thought you were somewhat skilled. A few of you thought you were somewhat unskilled, and about 10% of you haven't done a performance appraisal or performance evaluation before. So this will give this web, for those of you who haven't done it or are not skilled, this will give you some hints that you want to think about. And for those of you who are already consider yourself somewhat skilled, this may just give you some additional pointers or things to think about when you think about your performance appraisal system on the whole. So now that we've answered that question for ourselves, I wanted to show you how others had answered the same two of the questions that I asked, the only one that you got a chance to answer. So there's a consulting firm called Leadership IQ, and they did a study of 48,000 employees, managers, and CEOs. And when they were asked if their performance appraisal was useful, only 13% of employees and managers thought it was, and only 6% of CEOs thought the performance evaluation system was useful. So you have a much more positive opinion of your performance evaluation systems than some of the other people in the field. When they were asked if the performance appraisal was open, honest, and meaningful, only 17% thought that this was always the case. So you can see that nationally, people's satisfaction with performance evaluation system that they have available to them is quite low. So you may find yourself a lot luckier in the system that you have set up. But one of the things that we're always trying to do is make all of our appraisal systems and our performance evaluation systems a little bit more effective. When Alan and I are talking about performance evaluation today, we'll be talking about it as a component of overall performance management. And there are 5 key strategies to effective performance management. First, performance management should be an ongoing process of setting goals and expectations, executing plans, and evaluating results. It's not a once and done thing, but a constant process. The expectations that are set for employees should be specific and mutually agreed upon. There should be no vagary around what tasks and behaviors are expected. Employees are more engaged when they have buy-in to what they're doing, so involve them in planning their work and how it gets accomplished. When you're setting expectations, you want to take into account not only what the task is, but the standard to which the task should be accomplished. And finally, to get the best understanding and performance from employees, you want to be regularly providing constructive feedback. So instead of thinking of performance evaluation as a once a year performance appraisal, we'd like to think of performance management and evaluation as a year-round process. The beginning of the process is to set expectations and goals. Once those expectations and goals are in place, a supervisor will regularly observe how an employee is doing and check in to see how the work is coming along. Those observations and check-ins can result in some real-time feedback if improvement is needed and recognition when work is going well. The feedback and the follow-up is part of the ongoing coaching process that takes place throughout the year. Annually, or maybe more often for your new employees, a performance review will take place that sums up the feedback and performance of the employee over that period of time. And a development plan will be created for areas of improvement and for development. And then you'll start the process again by reviewing and maybe resetting expectations and goals. So as the previous slide shows, performance evaluation is a cycle and not a once a year event. It's a process and a cycle. And the primary purpose of the performance evaluation is not to simply evaluate, but to motivate employees to continuously upgrade their overall performance with check-ins, specific feedback, and ongoing coaching.
While the primary purpose of performance evaluation is to motivate employees to continually improve their performance, it also has a number of other important benefits. At its core, the performance evaluation process sets annual performance expectations and documents and measures employee performance against these expectations. In addition, it can include having employees set individual development goals and work to continually improve their skills and ability. Another benefit of this process is that it enhances communication between the employee and their supervisor in terms of what the employee is expected to do, what a quality job looks like, and how well the employee is doing. The evaluation process is motivational in that it helps supervisors focus on recognizing and appreciating good performance, as well as addressing problems. This process also encourages and promotes ongoing training and coaching opportunities for all staff, which is another motivational strategy. When people's skills and performance improve, they feel good about their job and they work harder. All the elements just noted help ensure that performance problems are minimized, and when they do occur, they are identified early and addressed quickly. And beyond the direct relationship between a supervisor and an employee, the performance evaluation process can provide some strong benefits for the agency overall. One of these is that it provides a rational basis for promotions, raises, transfers, and discipline. This in turn protects the organization against discrimination complaints by providing clear documentation and an objective basis for human resources decision-making. And finally, if the agency takes time at a high level to read through all the evaluations, they will see trends pointing to specific skill deficits and areas for agency-wide training or targeted recruitment. We hope you can see that the performance evaluation is not simply something to suffer through, but a very worthwhile process. If done well, it can provide a great deal of benefit to staff, supervisors, and the agency overall. So what does it mean to conduct an effective performance evaluation? I'm glad you asked. We have a 5-step process that structures the annual performance evaluation and also shows how to turn this into a year-round process. That's where the real benefit occurs, when you do this on an everyday basis. So here are the 5 steps. The first one, and the most challenging, is to set measurable goals and performance expectations. We spent a lot of time on this in an earlier webinar, and we'll do a quick review here as well. The second step is to observe the employee's actual behavior. This doesn't mean following them around or having them wear a body camera, but it means looking at the work they produce, the way they talk about what they do, what you hear from others, and filtering all these observations against the standards you set and the performance expectations. And that leads to step 3, measuring performance. If you created solid, measurable expectations and have collected sufficient information, then assessing and measuring performance becomes a very easy process. You simply look at all your observations, compare them to the expectations, and determine how well the employee is meeting these expectations. Steps 1, 2, and 3 complete the performance evaluation from the supervisor's seat. You set the expectations, observed performance, and assessed or evaluated performance. The fourth step is one that many people find difficult, but if you've done the first 3 well, it too is relatively easy. This is where the supervisor gives the employee feedback about their performance. You begin by reiterating the expectations, share your observations, and let them know what your assessment is. We'll talk more about this step in a few minutes. Step 4 completes the performance evaluation conversation. But the real power in the performance appraisal process is the final step, where you work together with the employee to identify training or development needs and collaborate to create a development plan that can rectify any weaknesses that have been identified and can help the employee move forward to the next level of higher competence. You should identify 1 or 2 areas to focus on. Think about whether the employee needs training in a formal classroom setting or through individual coaching. And if coaching, whether you or someone else will be the best person to provide that. It's important all through this process that the supervisor and employee work together collaboratively. The more they can see and assess things the same way, the more useful the outcome will be. It's important to see this as a dialogue where both parties are heard and their input considered. But it's also important to note that this is ultimately the supervisor's evaluation of the employee, and the supervisor has the last word on what the expectations are, what the assessment is, and what training or coaching will be planned for the coming year. The foundation of all these steps is the first one, setting clear and measurable performance expectations. As I mentioned, we covered this in great depth in our webinar on performance management, and Jenny earlier gave you the link to the recordings of relevant webinars that we did, and we'll give it again at the end of this webinar. But if you'd like to hear more about this, be sure to watch the webinar on performance management. But here's a quick overview. A performance expectation consists of 2 parts, the task to be done and the standard that defines how to do it well. The task is generally just a few words stating what the employee does, such as counsel a client, file a report, or go to court. And the standard states what a high-quality job looks like. You need to click. In terms of working with a client, standards include treating the client so they feel respected, or empowering the client so they're capable of solving many of their own problems. It can include responding within 1 hour or 1 day of the client making contact, whatever your standards may be. It could include documenting the interaction by the end of the shift or by the end of the week. The specific standard will vary from agency to agency and even from supervisor to supervisor. What's key is that the supervisor is very clear about what they consider to be quality work. Jenny's now going to talk about setting individual development goals that may go beyond the core tasks and standards.
Thanks, Alan. So another part of this process should be thinking about setting individual development goals for employees. Goals in general help us to move forward from where we are now, our present state, to our desired state. For new employees or for employees with performance problems, the only individual development goals that are part of their development plan may simply be to meet the performance expectations that have been agreed upon. For new employees, that's because it may take them a while to learn the job. And for poor performing employees, meeting performance expectation really needs to be the priority above everything else. But hopefully, a lot of us have higher performing employees, and setting individual development goals can be a way to help them think about opening up opportunities for advancement in the future, finding new and improved ways of doing things that will improve their outcomes and increase their motivation. So spend part of your performance evaluation or when you're setting expectations and to talk about what goals might be. Are there new skills that they want to learn that can help them open doors? Are there connections they can make or meetings they can attend that will increase their understanding of the field in general? Are there trainings or conferences that they can have access to that will help them build knowledge of best practices? or maybe there are new programs that they want to design or strategies they want to try. These can all be motivating development goals for your higher performing employees. Alan mentioned the performance evaluation process as being a dialogue, especially when you're setting tasks and standards and not a one-way conversation. And when you are setting your expectations and your goals, both the supervisor and the employee have a role. So let's talk first about the supervisor role. The first role of a supervisor is to clearly set the tasks, standards, and behaviors for performance expectations, as Alan outlined. Make sure that the employee understands what those expectations are. But beyond that, the supervisor wants to make sure that an employee understands how those expectations link back to the work of the organization. How do they align with the program itself and the organizational goals? If the employee is setting individual development goals beyond those performance expectations, then the supervisor's role is to help make sure those goals are clear and measurable. Finally, as we've already mentioned and we will come back to, the supervisor's role is to regularly provide coaching and constructive feedback about the employee's performance. The annual review part of the process should be just that, a review of the ongoing feedback that has happened throughout the year. Employees also have a role in the process, though. While the employees may not be setting their own performance expectations, they need to make sure they understand specifically what those expectations are and how they align with program and agency goals. If you're setting individual development goals, then the employee should have an active role in and even lead that process. And while the supervisor has a role to provide ongoing feedback about performance, an employee must also monitor their own performance and be honest with themselves about whether or not they're meeting expectations and making progress against their own goals. When running into trouble, it's an employee's responsibility to seek advice and guidance from a supervisor and to communicate problems and issues early before they escalate into something too big. If you've taken part in an evaluation, planning, or accountability workshop or webinar with me or Alan yet, then you will know that you will know the content of this next slide. It's not going to be a surprise to you. So clear and effective goals and expectations will follow SMART guidelines. So what do we mean by SMART? The expectation and goals that are SMART are specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and time-bound. For an expectation or goal to be specific, it needs to state exactly what is going to happen. For instance, instead of using words like thoroughly to describe what is required in a case note entry, a specific expectation around case note entries will design exactly what is to be included in that note. A measurable expectation will help you know when you've met that expectation. So instead of an expectation that a therapist will carry a full caseload, a measurable expectation will define how many cases constitute a full caseload. Agreed upon means that both parties know exactly what's going to happen. As we mentioned before, for expectations, that means that the employee understands exactly what is expected of them, what is the task, and what are the standards for that task. For an individual development goal, it may be that both the supervisor and the employee agree on what the goal is and what priority it has within the employee's time. A realistic expectation is one that can be accomplished within the time frame that is agreed upon with the resources available to the employee. And a time-bound expectation or goal is one that has a deadline. And that deadline might just be something that will be accomplished within the next 6 months, or it may be a regular deadline. So for instance, reports will be submitted within 3 days of the end of the month. So setting expectations and goals is the first step in the performance evaluation process. Alan's now going to take us through the other steps in the process.
We're going to go into a little more depth now on some of the steps involved in conducting performance evaluation. Jenny has discussed the first one fairly thoroughly in terms of setting expectations. Step 2 is to observe the employee's actual behavior or the results of that behavior. As we mentioned earlier, working remotely can make this a bit more challenging. But with phone calls, Zoom, and emails, we have fairly regular interaction with our staff. Their self-reporting and comments received from others can serve as observations of their performance as well. In addition, most staff have some paperwork to complete, and reviewing that is another way to observe their performance. It's important here to remember that performance is behavior. It's not attitudes or thoughts or feelings. What we're evaluating is how the employee behaves, how they act at work, what they say or do, not what they think or feel. Now, you may assess that someone has a bad attitude based on their bad behavior. What we need to report is not the attitude, but the behavior. An attitude is a guess on our part, trying to get inside their mind and see what they think and feel. It's subject to error and argument. Their performance, on the other hand, is directly observable and is much less subject to any kind of interpretation or argument. While it's best to have your own direct observation and not rely on the observation of others, that can be very difficult, particularly in this time of remote work. Even before the pandemic, those of you that supervise therapists who work behind closed doors or staff outstationed in other offices weren't able to see your employees in action. So it's fair to take into consideration the observation of others, and if they line up along a consistent trend, it's a reasonable statement to make that most of the people who report on their interactions with the staff member are either very pleased or feel that they're very professional, responsible, and effective, or they're dissatisfied and they feel that the staff maybe is disrespectful or unprofessional. And the last item under observing their behavior is that you document your observations, both what you hear from others and what you see yourself. Keep a running record all through the year of what the employee does that's effective and what they do that's ineffective. This doesn't mean you document every action they take, but on a weekly basis, you can summarize what you've observed and what you've heard about each employee's performance, and that becomes the basis for your annual evaluation. It's also the basis for any supervisory sessions, and if disciplinary actions become necessary in the future, this documentation can also support that. The next is step 3, where we're actually getting into the evaluation. We're comparing what we observed against the task and standards and evaluating which areas the employee is operating to the standard, above the standard, or below the standard. And that's the performance evaluation. Once we've done that, we want to step back and think about whether there are issues that are outside the employee's control that made it nearly impossible for them or anyone to meet the standard. If so, we need to include that in our notes as well. Then we want to think about how we're going to share this assessment with the employee in the most constructive manner. To do this, think about how to describe your observations in behavioral and objective terms, back to our SMART structure. It's more objective to tell an employee that your reports are frequently 2 days late, rather than saying you don't care about your work or you're not reliable. These last two statements are about the person, not the work. They're subject to argument, interpretation, and they're more hurtful. The first statement, your reports are frequently 2 days late, is behavioral and easily measured and can be backed up with documentation. So just stop there. That's all you need to address. Before we go on to the fourth step, we have another short poll. We'd like to get a sense of how many of you work in agencies where employees complete a self-evaluation as part of the process, and where this occurs, what the process is. We'd also like to know how useful you think self-evaluations are. Feel free to add additional comments in the chat box. The poll should open in just a minute. There's 2 questions. Please make your choices and hit the submit button when you're done. About 30 seconds left. Okay, if you haven't voted yet, you got 10 seconds. Lock in your answer, hit submit. Okay, the poll's closed and we'll see what the results are in just a minute. So in terms of self-evaluations, almost a third of you said it's required at your agency. Another third didn't answer. And about 26%, over a quarter, said it's not an option. So it's either, seems like it's either required or it's not an option. There's no optional choice in the middle. And then if you do have it, so only about half of you answered that you do have it. How useful is it? Very useful and somewhat useful together, was about 2/3 of the people responding. Very few people thought it wasn't useful or better not to do them. So, but there are a few. And so self-evaluations carry a number of benefits, but also a number of downsides. And we'll talk a little bit about how to structure it so that you maximize the benefit and minimize the downside. Um, so a number of ways to do this. One is that the employee can complete the evaluation in advance and give it to the supervisor. And the supervisor then does his or her evaluation, or the employee can share it with the supervisor at the evaluation meeting, and they exchange drafts right at that meeting, or the employee can write it as a self-reflection and not submit it, which is just a chance to ask the employee, before we start the evaluation, take a few minutes, take a day or two, think about how you've done over the year, what you did well, what you didn't well, and be prepared to come and talk about it. And that's another way. If you don't have it as an option, you can have the employee do some thinking ahead. But step 4 in the evaluation process is where the supervisor and employee each offer their own assessment. Again, with no self-evaluation, the employer, the supervisor gives their assessment and the employee gets to respond to it. But we like to make it a two-way conversation. And a process we recommend is that the supervisor writes out their evaluation of the employee independently. And they make notes of any feedback they want to offer and what goals for development they think there are. And at the same time, the employee is writing out their own self-evaluation based on the same performance expectations that they were given at the beginning of the year and maybe given again at this point to remind them. So they're writing down how well they think they met or exceeded or fell short of those expectations. And perhaps also noting things they did that went above and beyond their normal workloads, the things that were not part of the evaluation or part of the expectations. And employees can also at this time document factors that were outside their control that prevented them from doing the job, and that there were things that the supervisor may not be fully aware of or may not remember. But when the pandemic came, when things shut down, when so-and-so was sick, when this happened, when that happened, it was beyond my ability to get all the work done that we had. So our recommendation is that each party writes this separately, and then you bring it to the performance evaluation meeting, whether it's in person or by Zoom. And the first thing you do is exchange documents. So in person, you would hand the evaluation over that 6-foot gap. And if it's by Zoom, you would email each other the evaluation as you sit down to begin the conversation. Then each party takes a few minutes to read the other person's evaluation. As you're reading it, you identify what you agree with, where you disagree. And you also note things maybe you don't understand, you want some clarification or more information about. And what I like about this is that after each party reads it, there's a chance for people to reflect separately before they have to have a conversation. And what I like to do as the supervisor is to offer to the employee, okay, one of us has to go first and share our evaluation, and the other one gets to comment on it, and then we reverse roles. Which would you like to do, employee? Do you want to share your self-evaluation first, or do you want me to start off with mine? And they can begin and I'll listen, or they can share, or I can share and they can listen. Both ways work. Either way is fine. But by giving the employee the choice, you give them a little bit of power in the relationship and a sense of partnership and respect, which is really important. We said earlier, this is a two-way conversation. It's a dialogue. And when the employee is talking, whether they're sharing theirs or commenting on yours, your job is to carefully listen with full attention. So not be distracted by your email or by your phone or by anything else that may be going on, but you really want to make good eye contact and be 100% listening. It's a difficult conversation and employees deserve your full attention. After the employee finishes whatever part of the conversation they're commenting on, your job is to first summarize what you heard, to paraphrase or summarize the employee's comments so they know that you really listen. And you also want to check out that you heard them correctly. So that's a good way to affirm that as well. And once the employee affirms, yep, that's what I said, you heard it right, then it's your turn to share a comment. And after both parties have fully expressed their views on the evaluation and self-evaluation, then it's time to have a conversation and identify some core themes, reach agreement on areas where the employee is doing fairly well and areas where they need additional work. As I mentioned earlier, it's not a 50-50 decision. It's a mutual discussion. We try to reach mutual agreement, but ultimately it's the supervisor's evaluation of the employee, and it's the supervisor's words that end up on the document. Many of you have an opportunity for the employee to add their own comments, but that's a separate document. So different systems have different processes. Some require the supervisor to share their evaluation with their own supervisor before sharing it with the employee. Others require to share it after the conversation before it's finalized. So make sure you follow whatever process you have in your agency. One suggestion I have, and actually came from one of your agencies that I was working with, I thought it was a great idea, is to not put the final rating on the evaluation before the meeting. Typically, employees turn right to that. So what's the bottom line? Did I get a exceeds or outstanding, or what did I get? And then your comments, your written or oral comments, are really not heard. They just skip over that. So if there's nothing there for them to look at, then they're going to listen to your comments, read what you wrote. And that's the really most important part of the conversation, is your assessment, your discussion, not your final score. And you might hear things in the conversation that might change your rating. So rather than have to worry about, did you do it right or wrong, leave it out and do it later. So that would probably be a change in your process that you'd want to talk with your supervisor about. And the other thing is that you want to, once you do set the rating afterward, you want to share it with the employee right away, but it gives you a little extra level of oversight. It gives you a chance to back off as a supervisor, think it over, maybe gives you a little bit of courage to say things that are difficult and not give in when the employee says, I should get an outstanding, and you really think they just met expectations. You don't want to hurt their feelings. Well, having that extra day, talking to your supervisor might give you the courage to come back and say, I'm sorry, we see it differently, and I'm putting down the rating that I put down. Okay, so now you've finished the performance evaluation, but there's one more step. You set the expectations, completed the assessment, and delivered the message. Now you move on to the part that really is the very most valuable in the whole process, training and coaching the employee to overcome any deficits and to continue to grow and develop within the organization. If you don't do this step, then the evaluation is just a stale documenting performance and sitting in a file. By taking this extra step, we're motivating and developing our employees and continually improving their performance. For this step, it's very important to have collaboration between the supervisor and the employee. You can't train someone who doesn't want to be trained. Supervisor can identify expectations that weren't met and invite the employee to choose one or two to work on. Ask the employee for thoughts about what they can do to improve their performance in those areas and how they'd like the supervisor to assist them in this development. This part should be employee-led as much as possible, with the supervisor acting as the facilitator and coach. If the employee comes up blank, then the supervisor can offer some suggestions and thoughts about the best way to help the employee meet the expectations. In addition, this is where the supervisor works with the employee to set other goals the employee may wish to work on for their own development. All of this gets developed into an annual employee development plan that ideally both the supervisor and employee fully support. It should be a fairly specific plan, not a vague statement of goals to achieve. The plan should identify what the employee is going to do and what resources the agency is going to provide to help the employee build these new skills or ability. This plan becomes the foundation for ongoing supervision and feedback. The difference between weekly or semi-weekly supervision sessions and an annual performance evaluation is that the annual evaluation, all performance expectations are reviewed. On a weekly basis, only one or two selected areas are looked at and discussed. But otherwise, the weekly supervision is a mini version of the annual evaluation. This is a complex process, and while we have outlined the steps that will get you there, there can be barriers to success. Jenny will take a look at some of the signs that indicate your agency might need a new approach to performance evaluation. And as we mentioned earlier, Jenny and I are available to consult with you on any of this.
So Alan has led you through what we would consider all the components of an effective performance evaluation system. So now I want you to think back to your own system and your own performance evaluations. Because of the way we may have been previously doing performance evaluation, or because of the way the system is set up, it may be time to think about a new approach. So what are the top signs that you may need to do this? First of all, think about the feedback that people are getting on a regular basis within your program or your agency. If your employees are not receiving regular feedback on expectations, or if that feedback isn't constructive, then you might want to change up how you're doing things. In general, are supervisors putting off performance evaluations until the very last minute, and are they rushing to get them done? Or are they even eliminating them entirely? Then your system may not be thoughtful or consistent. You may need to think rethink your performance appraisal or performance evaluation system if supervisors use the same language across all of the appraisals they do, even though they're for different employees. You may want to think about a new approach if when you receive an appraisal for one of your top employees, their best accomplishments are not captured in the document. And finally, let's think back to that question we had in the first poll about whether or not the performance evaluation system, oh, well, we actually didn't have it in the first poll, but we should have had it in the first poll around performance evaluation being open and honest dialogue between supervisors and employees. If your system or the way you do performance evaluation doesn't include this open and honest dialogue, then you want to incorporate ways to make sure that it does. So what are some of the things you want to make sure your performance evaluation system does in order to overcome some of these barriers to providing great performance evaluations? First, regular constructive corrective feedback is a vital part of an effective performance evaluation. Alan went over it in some detail, and we cannot underline this enough. So make sure your supervisors are trained to provide this type of feedback. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about a way that Alan and I might be able to help you work with your supervisors through our training and technical assistance request program. So we can help you train you. There are other options for training supervisors, but making sure everybody understands how to provide constructive feedback and is doing it regularly is really important. And while regular feedback is essential to year-round performance evaluation, you want to make sure that you've scheduled enough time to do that thoughtful annual review. The annual review should reflect employees' performance from throughout the year and not simply from the last few weeks. And so sometimes if we put off performance evaluations or if we're not doing regular feedback, what a supervisor is looking at when they're doing the annual review is just the last couple of weeks of what's been going on. And you want to make sure you have a record and you have a time to think back about the full annual review of what's been happening. Make sure to capture both accomplishments as well as specific examples of where there are gaps between expectations and actual performance. And remember that the performance evaluation meeting should be a two-way conversation and should include time for feedback from the supervisor, but also time for active listening. And there should be an opportunity for both problem solving with the employee and setting goals for improved performance and individual development. We know that many of you may be operating within larger organizations and you may not have any control over what your performance appraisal tool is and what your performance evaluation system is. But even if you're locked into the tool that you're already using, we think you can incorporate almost all of these strategies still using that tool. First of all, even if your performance appraisal tool does not measure expectations the way we might have described them, you can still use what is in the tool and the meeting itself as an opportunity to start the discussion around expectations and goals. Sometimes performance appraisal tools measure things that are not necessarily priorities for the job your employee is doing. For instance, some tools measure punctuality and attendance with the same weight as they do communication skills. So make sure that as a supervisor, you define what priorities are most important for your employee's specific role. It may be that their punctuality is excellent, but you would like to see changes and improvement in another area in order for them to be effective in their position. So you need to make sure that they understand what those priorities are, even if they're weighted the same in your performance appraisal tool. And remember that even if your system doesn't use a self-assessment tool, you should find a way to make the conversation two ways. So Alan gave you some hints on how you might be able to do that. You can create an employee development plan, even if it's not part of your current system, and make sure you follow up on that plan regularly. And finally, most importantly, we should always assume that employees want to improve their performance. The issue often is that they don't know specifically how it is that they can do that. So feedback and coaching is the way to provide that information to an employee so that they are motivated to their higher performance. Alan and I have both already talked quite a bit about how evaluation is a year-round process, but we just wanted to review that process one more time. We start with setting or resetting expectations and goals. We make performance, excuse me, we start with setting expectations and goals, and then we do regular observations and check-ins to provide feedback and coaching. And finally, we review all of that with an annual performance review and development plan for improvement. And then we start it all over again. So what are some of the ways that we can support evaluation year-round? So make performance evaluation, including supervision, feedback, and coaching, a priority instead of the thing that gets canceled or pushed off when we're too busy and when there are too many other crises happening. Once you've created an employee development plan during the annual review, make sure that plan is implemented and include the goals and action plan steps as part of your regular supervision agenda. As Alan just mentioned, it should, your supervision meetings should be mini reviews, mini annual reviews. And so you're including those items in your agenda. You want to provide regular coaching and constructive feedback relating to expectations. I know I said it in the last slide and I'm going to but I'm going to repeat it over and over again. And finally, make sure that you don't only focus on things that need improvement, but also you celebrate accomplishments and successes, because that is very motivating for staff. So this wraps up our webinar, and we do have some time, so we'd like you to use the chat box for any questions you have, and we'll respond to them as they come in. For any of you who need to leave early, please be sure to complete the evaluation that will pop up as you end the webinar. We really do value your input and your feedback. While you're writing in your questions, I just want to do a quick review of the Training and Technical Assistance Request Program that OVS is providing to all of its funded agencies at no cost to you. Alan and I have mentioned it during this webinar. If you've been on other webinars, you certainly have heard about it, but we can provide a wide range of training, coaching, and consulting services. There's a link on this slide for more information, but we wanted to also give you some ideas about how you might use us in your agency if you're not exactly sure how that might work. So based on today's webinar, some of the things that we can do is work with leaders in your agency to design or look at ways to improve your current performance evaluation process, including we can help you draft a new performance appraisal tool that will include the 5 steps that Alan talked about and include SMART standards for effective performance evaluations. We can help develop systems that will allow supervisors to follow through better on employee development plans. And as I mentioned earlier, we can provide coaching and training to supervisors on how they set those performance expectations and then how they provide constructive, corrective feedback. And we can work with supervisors individually to help them, we can coach supervisors to help them coach their employees better. And speaking of coaching, during the crisis, OVS has made us available on an ad hoc basis to provide individual coaching to managers and leaders of funded agencies. We can serve as independent sounding boards for you to bounce off ideas and concerns that have come up first, because of the crisis itself, sometimes around the difficulty of remote supervision, and now as we transition back, there are new things that are turning up for people. But we can also help you explore new strategies to more effectively lead your team, regardless of whether it has to do with the crisis or not. So if you'd like to find more about this or sign up for the coaching itself, you can go to this calendar link that's at the bottom of the screen here and set up an initial session. And we can either do coaching right there, or we can help you explore whether coaching is right for you or if there's a training program that's right for you. All coaching sessions are completely confidential. They are free, and there's no application is needed. So now I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to turn it over to Blake to wrap up the webinar, but Alan and I are going to stay on and answer any questions you might have after Blake finishes. So again, please write your questions in the chat box now, and we'll get to those. And then if you have questions later, or you want to find out more about the services we provide, you can email us. Both Alan and my emails are here on the screen, or you can use that same calendar link that was on the last screen and is repeated here just to set up a phone call with us. Blake, you want to wrap up?
Yes, thank you. So we do have plenty of time, so please type your questions in, and if you can, choose all panelists so that everybody can see them in the chat feature. Special thank you to Jenny and Alan. You guys, this was an awesome webinar today, but also just an awesome sort of cap to the entire Transitions Forward series. You guys have done a great job between this and our original one we did back in April. So kudos to you guys. Check out the full list of their webinars on our OVS training, VAP Training Center webpage. In addition, I think Jenny and Alan are a little modest in promoting their role in the TARP program. They really do run this, and it has been extremely successful, and we really encourage you guys to check it out and consider submitting a request. There are thousands of dollars available in free training to you guys. So OVS handles it and takes care of it, and make sure that Jenny and Alan are available to you guys at no cost. So we want to make sure you still take advantage of that while you still can. So check that out on our training center as well. Don't forget to do your evaluation. So if you're not sticking around for the Q&A, please, as Jenny said, that feedback is crucial. We can't thank you enough for taking the time to do that. And then next week, we have a webinar on the it's a webinar in our Title IX series related to the Title IX regulations that came out. So there's a link to that on our training page as well. So join us then. But other than that, let's jump into some questions.
Hey, there were a couple of comments about self-evaluations while I was talking. One person said it was very helpful, gives the supervisor a clear picture of how the employee evaluates themselves and also identifies successes that are not yet shared. I fully agree with that. And someone else said they used to work for an organization where they did self-evaluations and they sat with the supervisor to review and discuss. And if they evaluated themselves differently, the employee and the supervisor, there was a chance to have a good conversation. It was a great platform to discuss expectations and barriers. We don't do them where I am now, and I think it would be very helpful. Those are some comments on self-evaluation.
There was one question. So while we're on that topic, Alan, there was one question about whether or not we could provide a template for a employee self-assessment. And I guess the first thing I would say is, the employee self-assessment should mirror pretty much what the supervisor is assessing, what the supervisor is assessing, or what the priorities for the assessment is. So I don't, so I usually would have those be pretty close to the evaluation. I don't know that we have a template. Alan, do you have a template that you use?
No, it should mirror basically it should be, I like to give the employee at the end of the year the list of all the expectations that I gave them at the beginning of the year. Hopefully you're doing that, that they're all written out, and then ask them to sit down and review each of those and how well they're meeting them. So it does pretty much parallel the agency's supervisor's evaluation. So it's the process more than the form. I think that's important. And I just want to share one more thing on that since it's come up that um, I used to work in an agency where I didn't trust my supervisor. We didn't have a good relationship, and we had to do a self-evaluation. And the rule was I turned it into my supervisor before he or she wrote their evaluation of me. And I always felt like I was in a catch-22. If I was a little too braggy about myself, the supervisor might not like that. But if I didn't say all the good things, they may not remember them. If I criticize myself about things, they may have forgotten them, and now I'm reminding them. So it felt like I was not going to win either way. Whereas the model we're suggesting is supervisor does the evaluation without seeing mine. So that's their best shot. And then I do mine. And here's the other rule I didn't mention is that the supervisor can't add anything negative to their evaluation of me based on what I wrote, but they can add anything positive so that I can be fully honest and be self-critical. And I know it's not going to sink my evaluation, so that it allows for a lot more open discussion. So there's no template, but that it would be important to think about. I believe handing them over at the same time is much better than the employee doing it in advance. So.
Okay.
Another question was employees who get rated below meet standards, even if I give them specific examples, they become very upset or angry, even when all the other standards are meet or above expectations. And that's true that people look down that list and anything good, they just pass by. Anything bad, they want to argue and fight about. So the question was, how can supervisors provide the feedback in a more acceptable way? I think part of it is just to understand that we have some strategies for giving effective feedback, and that was in one of our performance management webinars. And you can do the best you can do. People will still be defensive. So the key is to deliver your feedback honestly and straight up. Talk about their behavior, what you've seen. Talk about the expectation, their behavior that doesn't meet it, and why you think there's a gap, or the fact that you think there's a gap, not why they're doing it. And stop, and then they'll be defensive and they'll argue and they'll whatever. And listen to them. Actively listen, whether you agree or not, whether it's lies or excuses or blame. Listen, paraphrase, and that helps calm people down. They're hurt and they're attacked and they need to defend themselves. So let them do that. And then when they're all done, say, I hear what you're saying, and repeat back to prove that you do. You don't agree with me, you see it differently. Um, and, you know, from what you've said so far, I still stand by my assessment that in this case, you're not meeting standards. And I'd like to talk to you about how we can do it. Try to move the conversation into problem solving as quickly as you can. And if they want to continue to argue and fight, you say at the end of the conversation is to say, okay, we're going to agree to disagree. It's my evaluation of you, so this stands. You're free. Most agencies have an opportunity for the employee to write comments. If so, you can write your comments. We'll attach it to the evaluation. Nothing you've said makes me want to change my mind. So that, I mean, that's kind of doesn't always end nicely, and that's why people avoid these evaluations. But overall, it is really a positive process, and for 95% of employees, at the end of the process, they come out feeling good about it.
Right. And the
Alan,
other thing I would, the other just, and then Rachel, before we, the other thing I would just mention is there shouldn't be anything on the performance appraisal, the performance evaluation that is a surprise. So, if you're doing ongoing feedback and you should have just discussed a lot of, everything on there beforehand. So an employee shouldn't be surprised to see something that is below expectations because you would have had a conversation about it beforehand. So this is an annual review. These are things that you've given feedback on. They're working. They're still not meeting expectations. But I always want to remind that the point of making it a year-round process is that there are no surprises on the annual review. They're just kind of what is being written down on that one specific tool. It's the review. It's the sum up of what's going on. And I'm sorry, Rachel, you wanted to speak.
No, that's actually exactly what I was going to say, Jenny. As someone that's been on the receiving end of a performance evaluation that I was completely shocked by, and in a not a good way, that was a horrible, horrible feeling to say all year we would meet every week and you never told me any of this. How could I fix it? Whereas I've had other evaluations where there were things I know I was working on, and part of what was good, even if it wasn't as high a rating as I wanted, it allowed myself and the supervisor to provide notes about the work that had been done throughout the year to improve it. So even if it wasn't as good as you wanted it to be, there was a space to say, however, from February to April, there's been a percentage increase in behavior. So you're tracking that trajectory, hopefully upwards, which I think is helpful. It made me feel a lot more a part of the conversation.
Of course, those negative ones did not come from me. That's
I mean,
Rachel, for clarification
the
here.
person that gave you the negative review, this was a previous engagement, and they're no
Yes.
longer with their company. So it wasn't me, of course. But yeah, it's all about being aware and not being surprised. I think
Yeah,
as
no surprises.
someone who's supervised. Yeah.
And so based on that, I will, one of the questions on here was, do you have, you speak a lot about ongoing coaching as a follow-up. What are the key coaching strategies you recommend? And I would say we have lots of great coaching strategies that we recommend, and we did a whole webinar on it. And so, and I will, flip back to the beginning to see if we can, so it was the last one we did. It was just a couple of weeks ago. So the link is there. I encourage you to listen because we have a lot of strategies. Alan, are there any that you would want to touch on? Or, I mean, there's a lot there.
The one key thing, I said earlier about the active listening, that's a key part of coaching. And the other part is moving to problem solving, moving to a performance plan, and getting out of the, I said, you said, I did, you did, it is what it is. We both air our sides. The supervisor gets to make the final call. And then, okay, given that, I'd like to see you meet this standard, how can we move into that direction? But yeah, as Jenny said, there's a lot to coaching. We'd be happy to talk with you individually, but take a look at the webinar. We covered a lot of great points there. Somebody else had a comment I wanted to share that in terms of a template, that they use their job description for the evaluation, and then they allowed a place for other duties as assigned. So that's another way. If your job description has clear statements of what is expected of the employee, that could be a simple template for a self-evaluation.
And there was one comment that said some of our supervisors act more like friends or too informal relationship, and instead of like supervisors, and that sometimes leads to a problem giving objective feedback. So it's something that this person has discussed a lot, but have a hard time changing that culture. And it's a hard thing for supervisors, especially new supervisors who have been friends and colleagues for a long time and suddenly find themselves in that supervisory relationship. So really, making sure that they have the training, they understand how to give feedback in a way that focuses on the behavior and not on the personality. But it's hard. It's something that you have to get practiced at. You have to practice giving feedback and do it regularly, and make sure you're setting those boundaries as a supervisor in the workplace so that you can give corrective feedback, that you can coach, and that you have that objective supervisor employee relationship, while at the same time having a friendly relationship. It doesn't mean that people can't be friendly, but it is important that you're able to comment and give feedback on behaviors that are not meeting standards.
Yeah, something else I'd say with that is that it sounds like this person supervises supervisors. So if you're in a supervisory relationship with these folks who are acting friends and not giving correct feedback and not being objective, one thing you can do is you can hold those people responsible for their employees' performance and say, I don't care how you take care of it, but your job is to make sure that your employees are completing all the reports on time, seeing all the clients that we need to see, providing services where people feel well treated, respected, and appreciated. That whatever you define as effective for the employee, not the supervisor, but the employee who reports to them, you and that supervisor can work together to set clear performance expectations, and then say, "This is what I expect you to deliver." And you want to be good friends and do it socially and get them all to be on board, I'm okay with that. But if they're not performing, that's a problem for the supervisor, and that's how you change the culture. That you hold people accountable for results, and if they're not delivering results, they have to find a new method. If you try to dictate their methods, in this case, it's a very hard thing to change. You can't be friendly. What does that mean? But so hold them accountable for what you do want, and they're going to find that they can't stay friends and do that. They have to be able to separate during the workday, be a supervisor, be friends at night, be friends at lunch, but in the workday they have to be business. So.
And then one question here about whether people use upward or peer evaluations. And one thing we didn't talk today about was 360 evaluations that some organizations use, and that we can certainly talk to you individually about, if you think it's the right approach for your leadership team or for people within your organization. But
so peer evaluation or 360 is basically, it's not just the supervisor and the employee talking about what they do, but it's the supervisor getting feedback, and it's more done at a leadership level than at a line staff level. But that frontline supervisors all the way up to senior managers would get feedback from their own supervisor, the people who report to them, the people they work with laterally, and even people maybe outside the agency that they have significant contact with. And what's really nice about that, it's a scary thing for the person being evaluated. So there has to be a lot of trust that this is done for their development, not to play gotcha. But it's a chance for people to honestly, confidentially, anonymously give information to somebody about how they see them operating. And it gives you a 360 view of yourself, how you come across to people, and can, share a lot of great strengths that you have or recognize and appreciated, and identify some areas for growth. So that kind of a peer or 360 evaluation can be very valuable. And upward evaluation, I think, is also a great idea to just on a one-on-one basis. I'm evaluating my employee, and at the end of that, I often do build into that as a separate conversation, but in the same time period, within the same week or two, say, okay, we've finished evaluating you. I'd like you to evaluate me. I'd like some feedback on what I do well as your supervisor and where I could improve, how it can be helpful to you in the year going forward. So it's a way to kind of start the year by getting some feedback. So upward, I would do one-on-one, and then the 360 is done as a group. So happy to talk to you more about that in individual coaching sessions if anyone wants to get consultation around doing those things.
just double checking to see if we've missed any. Don't see any.
We're a little past noon, but if anybody has a last question real quick, you want to type it in? Otherwise, we'll wrap things up.
Sorry, my cats are literally fighting right now. So if I have to walk away, my apologies. I do see some good positive feedback in here, though. Again, kudos to you two for an awesome presentation. You guys deserve it. But I don't see.
Thank you. And we've really enjoyed doing them. If you do
Mhm.
go back and watch any of the webinars and you have follow-up questions for us, please feel free to reach out. And again, we really encourage people to, even if you're not sure how you would use the training and technical assistance request program, reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk about how we've done it with other people. You know, what projects we've done. Sometimes it's training, sometimes it's just consulting. You know, how can we make this better within the agency? And so we're happy to talk to you about that if you're just having a hard time getting your hands around the concept,
Yeah.
your head around the concept.
Yeah, so you know, a lot of people have asked too where the slides are available and if where the recordings will be, but just stay tuned. About a day after today's webinar, so maybe tomorrow at the earliest, we'll send out a link with all of the information, the slides, the actual recording link on our YouTube channel. And if you don't get that, just check back on our training webpage. We constantly update that for you guys as well. So take a look and take advantage of, you know, sharing this with your colleagues, but also possibly reaching out to Jenny and Alan and taking advantage of TARP. So we hope you stay in touch with us.
As Jenny's scrolling through, our emails are at the end of the slide
Yep,
presentation,
that's what I was trying to get to.
along with
There
the
they are.
There we
along,
are.
along with the
And
calendar
in
link.
your slides if you
Yeah.
downloaded them. So,
Yep. Yeah. So if you download the slides, you'll have that, and the calendar link is on the training and OBS training webpage, so you'll find it there too.
Well,
perfect.
Jenny, Alan, thank you again for an awesome
Thank you.
presentation, and we'll hopefully return soon with some more content for you guys. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Terrific. Thank you.
Bye bye.